We are recording. Doug, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Molham Aref, CEO of RelationalAI. Welcome to the Insight Jam.
Thanks, Doug. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, so there's a lot of things I want to cover, but first things first, talk a little bit about what you see as the opportunity for relational AI and in particular, how it relates to the enterprise.
All right. So I've been working in and around AI for a little over 30 years now. And a lot in the context of the enterprise specifically, one of the most common use cases is to try to use AI to improve decision-making in the enterprise. Typically an enterprise has limited resources, so much capital, and has to allocate it to inventory or real estate or labor or spectrum or manufacturing. And the key to success is making sure these things are allocated properly, that decisions are made in as close an optimal way as possible, defining success as being sort of long-term profitability. And so over the years, we've developed a lot of different techniques for enhancing decision-making in enterprise. Okay, so AI is not a new thing. I know today AI is Gen AI, and I think Gen AI is fantastic, and I think it's another amazing tool in the toolbox. But over the years, we've had sort of deep learning applied to various problems. We've had simulation techniques, mathematical optimization techniques, rule-based reasoning, graph analytics. All of these things are often combined to solve enterprise problems or to create applications that can help business people make better decisions. And so what I learned over the years is assembling all these different technologies together in one footprint to drive such an application is complicated and taxing and expensive and takes time. And so, having built such systems, I thought, wouldn't it be great to have technology that would make it easier to build intelligence into applications, or intelligent applications as they're called now. So relational AI is all about that. We think it's very important to meet people where they are, and where they are typically is on some kind of relational platform like Snowflake or BigQuery or a similar system. That's where the data is. Obviously, the data drives much of AI. And so we created a coprocessor that plugs into these platforms that gives them these superpowers or these new capabilities that they historically haven't had. And so you can much more easily, in a much more straightforward way, develop those types of capabilities.
So you've been at this a while, and I appreciate the distinction between AI, machine learning, automation, and what's got everybody all spun up right now with regard to OpenAI and generative AI and so forth. Walk me through the evolution there a little bit about what you found as you've been traveling that path. I mean, how did you get to this space?
Yeah, so my first exposure to machine learning and AI was in the early 90s, working in an advanced development group at AT&T on computer vision type problems. Now, at the time, technology wasn't very powerful, and so it was mostly about document understanding, a little bit of maybe analyzing a retail environment to see, are people standing in line or not? Very basic information that can, again, help you make decisions about, do I open up a new teller, for example, to shorten the line, or how can I automate the analysis and the processing of documents so that I can take in more applications for insurance or whatever it is that I'm doing. So computer vision was my entry point. Afterwards, I went to work for a company called HNC Software. HNC stood for Heck Nielsen Neurocomputing. So this was the first time neural networks were applied to enterprise problems. And the first problem we had success solving was credit card fraud detection. So it was all about analyzing lots and lots of credit card transactions. Some of those transactions were flagged as fraudulent. And so having a neural network learn what's likely to be fraud or not, and understanding that in terms of every individual and their own purchasing behavior, so to make sure that the fraud detection is done intelligently. And as you get into that, you learn very quickly that it's not enough to have a model that tells you fraud, no fraud. Usually it's a number from 0 to 100, let's say. And so depending on the bank and depending on the credit card issuer, you can decide, on different ways of dealing with that. So for example, if you're the kind of bank where you really offer high-end service, and one of your most important customers is deemed to be, scored as maybe this is a fraudulent transaction, you might actually decide to let it through because in case it's not, you don't want to embarrass or upset.
So reject the card at the fancy steakhouse.
Yeah, so you call them afterwards to make sure, but you might let it through. But if it's a very unprofitable customer, then you're pre-rejecting it as much as possible because you don't care where they go. And so you end up having to build complete systems that have rule-based reasoning embedded in them, because depending on the customer and the score and the various factors, you might route the transaction one way or another or a third, and each bank and credit card issuer wants to do that differently. So rule-based reasoning, which is one of the first AI technologies, is very relevant. And then over time you decide to improve, for example, fraud detection by understanding how people interact with each other and trying to understand sort of the credit worthiness, for example, of someone based on who they live with or who they do business with. And so that starts to look at graph technology and who's connected to who, and so on. And then sometimes you make a prediction about, something, and for example, the relationship between a discount or a price and how many units of the shirt that you're going to sell. And so you might use things like mathematical optimization, integer programming when you're programming other kinds of optimization technologies, to set a price so that you capture all the demand there is, but you capture it in the most profitable way possible, okay? Because the price too high means you're not going to sell a lot, and the price too low, you sell everything, but you don't make money. So where should that price be? And there's just a ton of really amazing technology that runs the world around solvers and optimizers that schedules all the logistics on the planet, that runs supply chain networks, that does all the pricing. So these are all examples of techniques you use to drive a ton of business value, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars of business value.
And so where does the art and the science begin to, I guess, diverge, right? It strikes me that there's a certain amount of art, or there was a certain amount of art in what you were describing, right? So business analysts looking at problems and thinking through potential rules and other techniques. But it strikes me that we're now entering into just straight up raw horsepower. Where does it diverge? And what is, how does a human hang with it to the point where they can drive business value beyond what they can even potentially comprehend it can do? I mean, how do you get there?
Well, I think that one of the sort of the deepest insights I have from doing this for a while is that ultimately, to manage complexity and to manage the kind of nuance and the detail that now can be captured in various types of probabilistic statistical models, deep learning, et cetera, is that you need to have some kind of model of the business that you're dealing with. Okay, some kind of abstraction, because you can't keep all the details in your head. And so you have to sort of look at sort of the fundamentals of a business or the essence of a business to kind of capture specific important properties. So a business has products maybe or services. It sells to customers. It might or might not have stores. It might have websites that it sells through. It might have various facilities like distribution centers and warehouses. It has suppliers. It has a notion of time, what time means in that business. Are we an hourly business? Is that the granularity we worry about, or is it daily or weekly or monthly or all of it? So as it turns out in my experience here, is you can take the most complicated business on the planet. Okay, take JP Morgan or take AT&T or take some of these sort of, Fortune 100 businesses. And at their core, there might be a few dozen, maybe a couple hundred core concepts that you need to understand in order to understand the business. Okay. And so one of the things that we do is we help enterprises build these models using a knowledge graph, where you distill sort of things down to their essence, this is the core set of concepts that we discussed, and then the relationships between them. And then you can hang off of that all sorts of analytics, including the predictive and the prescriptive and the descriptive. You can, hang analytics that sort of look back in time to help you understand what happened, and then look forward in time and predict what might happen if you make different decisions, and might even recommend to you, hey, you should, set the price here because that's going to give you the most profitable answer. So having an abstraction, even if the machines don't need it, us as humans, we need to be able to talk to the machine in terms of concepts like products and customers and so on. And so having an abstraction like a knowledge graph is very, very important to manage this complexity.
And so in order for you to engage effectively, in your team to engage effectively, you really need that pre-thinking and vision for, what the business ultimately is in order to get the value that you're bringing to the table, or otherwise you're just selling them things that they can't take advantage of?
No, I think it's very important to introduce these ideas into businesses in a way that they can sort of iterate over them and sort of adopt them gradually.
And so, who owns that in an enterprise?
So we typically work with chief data officers. Okay, so that's kind of a relatively new role. Data is so important and is seen as being fundamental to effective decision making. So chief decision officers are now tasked with getting a handle around the data. And again, the systems like Snowflake and BigQuery and others are now places now. You have new kinds of database technologies that are so scalable. You can put all your data in a Snowflake. And, the data in some cases many cases comes from thousands of, discrete applications, each with their own mini database, each with their own schema, their own model of the business for their piece of the business. And it's very often the chief data officer and team that are building a semantic layer or some kind of model that abstracts over all these data silos to try to kind of unify, hey, in this business, when we talk about a product, we call it an item, okay, or we call it a SKU. And here are the kinds of things that you can do with an item or a SKU. So that's very often where it starts. But eventually, you can't do everything through the CDO. Eventually, each line of business executive needs to be empowered to take sort of these core assets and evolve them in the direction that makes sense for their part of the business. And so you use this as a basic scaffolding that different businesses sort of fill in over time. It's very, very important not to think of this as we're going to take 3 years, go away, take 3 years, put all this together, and it's going to be birthed complete. It's very important, you start with a handful of concepts, maybe a dozen concepts, and you get going, you start driving value, and you flesh it out, as needed and as, business demands.
Well, it strikes me that you find prospects and clients in varying degrees of sophistication.
Yeah.
And with regard to data, I think because of the nature at which data has been accumulated over the years, it's in a variety of forms of cleanliness and storage.
Yep.
And so, how do you, what do they need to be thinking about before they even come to this conversation with you? I mean, what would you provide for advice with regard to somebody who says, you know what, I've been hearing about these guys. Snowflake tells me these guys are somebody we should be talking to. I mean, what do you need to see them have together in order for you to be able to start to add some value?
Yeah, for us to make the most sense, I think it's important that the folks that we're working with have started and are reasonably far along on their journey to the data cloud of choice. Okay, so I think if you observe our industry, you see every decade or so, sometimes more frequently, you see these platform transitions. Mainframe to mini to micro to client server to cloud. Different types of database management, database technologies, even at the device level, you see platform transitions and you see user interface technologies change from character mode to GUI to mobile to now speech. And so we're betting on sort of this most recent platform transition, and all our energy is going into making things work better on the data cloud, starting with Snowflake. And I think it's important, before calling us, it's important to have a strategy around that and to have begun the journey to move, much or many or most of your data assets onto a platform like that. Because where we step in is once you have a few hundred or even a few dozen data silos, and now you're having difficulty navigating across those data silos, then sort of knowledge graphs become relevant, and then being able to support decision-making via data-driven analytics becomes feasible, and we can start doing the Gen AI and the statistical modeling, the predictive and the prescriptive, and all of those analytics. We probably not a good fit for you if you're still fragmented on-premise, on Hadoop or Teradata or something.
Well, so let's talk about that for a second, because I'm old enough to remember when everybody used to tell me, we'll never go to the cloud. That's crazy talk, that we have a lot of large cold rooms that we've invested billions of dollars in, and we're going to keep all of our data right there because we know where it is, and we can go and visit it whenever we want.
Yeah.
But those days are over in your mind? I mean, that you can't stay competitive that way?
So, yeah, I think, there are still some holdouts, and there are still some industries where either there isn't a ton of competition, so there's no incentive to adopt. We see, pockets of that. Or some industries are maybe heavily regulated in some way that makes that more difficult. And certainly, I agree with you. Certainly, I remember almost being walked out of the building in 2010 and 2011, as my previous company, we went all in on the cloud. People were like, "Are you crazy? You want me to put my data on someone else's servers?" And that's that company might even be a competitor of mine. Don't waste my time. But I also point out is that's always the case in any kind of platform transition. Okay. It was, Ken Olsen, though. I don't know. I'm old enough to remember Digital Equipment Corporation, right? I think it's famous for saying
down the street from where we are right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So Ken Olsen is famous for saying Unix is snake oil. You remember that? Or people thought that the PC was a joke, and
I remember Wang. I go all the way back.
Wang, Data General, even HP, Honeywell, even in the mainframe era, Sperry, Burroughs, giants, right? And they're giants, and then seemingly overnight they become dinosaurs. They go extinct.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, and we've seen it over and over again. We've seen it with Lotus 123, and WordPerfect. Remember how dominant those were?
Sure, of course.
New platform comes along, they don't make the platform transition.
That's right.
And toast. So the new platform here is the data cloud. See, it's sort of a higher level of abstraction above the cloud. And companies like Snowflake are doing today what Oracle did in the 90s, is going to CIOs and CDOs and saying, you build on me, and I'll abstract over all the compute clouds and depositions the compute clouds. Well, they're kind of like the IKEA of clouds. You have to sort of hand assemble everything. Here as a data cloud, we give you all you need. We give you a much better, let's say, starting point for application development and solution development than you have if you're dealing with some low-level computing where you have 300 different services that you have to hand assemble.
I actually do another podcast with one of our solutions review experts, David Lotion. It's called Information Risk, and we talk every week about different ways that companies can get into trouble with data, or organizations can get into trouble with data. And I'm curious about this level of automation and data biases and the information risk that is associated with this level of automation and ultimately the implications downstream from this sort of extreme modeling and prediction.
So specifically, you mean from a security perspective? Or
no, I mean from certainly from a security perspective, but I mean more from almost a bias perspective, where you get into potentially government regulation implications based upon whose credit card the system has now decided so far downstream that the rules are no longer even clear what occurred.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think this is another reason to have sort of a basic model as an abstraction, because if you don't have a human interpretable artifact that helps you understand things and explain things, okay, then you leave yourself very open to letting the machines do things that are not ethical or not legal or, are problematic in a variety of ways, okay? And so, again, being able to sort of bring it back to something explainable or something that you can validate in some way. And this is a similar sort of problem with Gen AI now, especially in the enterprise. And, it gets the answer right very often, but every now and then it just makes something up, And if you have sort of Gen AI doing stuff without validating that the answer is correct, right? I think they're very creative in answering your question, but sometimes the answer is fiction, and so you need to be able to ground the answer in something. And so again, a model and a knowledge graph is really, really important to kind of help you understand and help you validate the output of AI.
Well, so let's talk about that and shift gears a little bit because you have been seeing this evolution, and I'm sure you were able to see from that perspective what the next 10 years are going to look like, at least in your mind. And I've been thinking about it a lot. And truth be told, I think we're going to have a human problem on our hands as this begins to spool out in the fact that it's going to automate so many rudimentary tasks or tasks that would have been performed by people who are further down the organization, but appropriately so. I mean, we all start there, right?
Right.
Junior developer, senior developer, data, software architect on up the food chain. But if all of a sudden, as has been predicted, Gen AI can code for us better than any person can code.
Yeah.
Where are the implications here? I mean, do we lose a layer of junior developer now, and just where's the path? And
right.
How have you given it some thought as to the human implications here? Because it's millions and millions of well-paid jobs that are information workers that are going to be hanging in the balance.
Yeah, so I think there's a utopian and a dystopian perspective that you can take on this. Okay, so the dystopian perspective is what you mentioned. The computers automate away everything, and we're all unemployed. And
not everything. Not everything.
Or automate away so much enough where it does create
I would argue that you eliminate the bottom rung, the entry level, which is a problem. You need the entry. I believe we all started at the entry level. I mean, I taught myself HTML way back in the day. I mean, we all start there.
Yes.
If that doesn't exist anymore.
Yes. So obviously, if it doesn't
exist.
I agree this is something concerning. I certainly don't mean to make light of it. But again, this has been sort of at the core of every technology transition going back to the loom, and the Luddites.
But in fairness, though, because I've heard this too, the Industrial Revolution and the loom, but it took you years before you could afford a loom or a second loom to be able to get rid of the weavers.
Sure.
This scales. This is digital. This scales infinitely immediately. I mean, this is not that.
Okay, so I get what you're saying. Give me sort of. Let me.
I don't. But that one always bothers me. But everybody always comes back to that. It's like, we've been through revolutions like this before. But I would argue we haven't. I would argue this is not the internet. This is not mobile. This is not the PC. This is not keep going back.
Yeah.
This is something completely different.
The point you're making here is it's happening very fast. It's happening in a way that is you can't retool people quickly enough at the timescales that we're talking about. So, look, it's possible. I've also heard counter arguments beyond, the loom argument around, if you look at sort of, I'm sure most people watching this work in enterprise technology and so on. One is sort of the most painful constraints we all have to deal with is just availability of people who can do this kind of work. Okay, so I've heard projections of as many as like there's demand for 400,000 more people to do technology and IT than there's supply for. Okay, I've also heard, actually, it's been kind of eerie in the last few weeks in particular, the sort of phrase that's been repeated. It's not that AI is going to replace people. It's that people using AI will replace people who are not using.
I've heard that one too.
Yep. And I think there's merit to both of those arguments, right? I think there's merit to think through that, right? If we can, alleviate the problems we all have, finding talented people to solve, all the problems that we can solve to make our businesses more effective, to provide a better customer experience, and so on, I think that could actually be a win. I don't think we'll go from needing 400,000 people to having 400,000 people sitting on the beach, or sitting dealing with unemployment. So I don't think we're at a point now. That point might happen in the future where you just say, okay, I want to build a business like Amazon, and then the machines take care of it. Okay, from there. I think there's still very much a co-pilot kind of mode to this. And large, for the same reasons that we discussed here around these things are not perfect. They are not very precise. They can make mistakes. And having AI as a co-pilot seems to be the right model.
But we're at 4.0 or whatever we are, right? I mean, it's early and it's already remarkably impressive. And I've got to believe that companies are engaging relational AI very much with an eye toward, every business. It's the reason why there are going to be so many, in my mind, there are 5 million or more developers in India who, if you were to ask me, you get rid of 30% of them based upon, some sort of automated coding capability. And you're talking millions of incredibly well-paid jobs in India just obliterated instantaneously. That's not a good thing. But secondarily, you've got the reason why everybody's in India is because businesses were able to get coding cheaper in India, and so the offshoring revolution occurred, and businesses grew in India to provide that cheaper labor. This strikes me as just the next inevitable step in the cheapest possible delivery of a service. And so, I got to believe that companies are coming to you with, and they may not say it out loud, but they're coming to you with something in the back of their mind that says, we might be able to take advantage of this to be more profitable.
Yeah, of course. That's the whole, that's the point, is to provide a better service that people want to pay for, or better product people want to pay for, so that you can build successful businesses. But let's take your India example. I think that's a very good one. It's not just India; it's China. It's
right. No, I agree completely.
Every developing country on the planet has seen sort of information technology as a path to modernization and improvement. Even with all that extra supply of technical talent, okay, have you looked at salaries in the U.S. for good software engineers? It is the demand, I would say, is even higher today for software engineers, data scientists, technical people, okay? Even if you assume 100 million new software engineers sort of being brought into the supply base global. Because
so what do they do? If this is where we're going, and in the end, given, our kind of early experience with some of the fits and starts of OpenAI and ChatGPT and whatever else, large language models where they limit, what's in there. But in the end, it's an arms race. It's going to get, there's just no stopping it. The technology companies can't stop. They're going to make it better. It's going to be ridiculously good, and I would argue inhumanly good, to the point where it's perfect and ridiculously fast. Faster than you could possibly. So where does it end? Where does it go? I agree with what you're saying. In the short term, we need more technologists. Agreed. But that, I used to buy my music in a record store. I used to, go down and get videos at Blockbuster. I mean, there are going to be downstream implications in 10 years.
Yeah, of course. I'm just saying they don't have to be necessarily negative. They can be. And
how can they not be? I'm trying to I want you to help me understand that. How can they not be?
Right. No, I think there are very positive outcomes here. So actually, I'll give you sort of 2 pointers. I'll see if I can summarize very quickly here. One is Sam Altman. He has a year ago, he was going around giving a nice talk about, what happens to the world when the price of intelligence goes down to zero. He was actually saying,
right.
Yeah. Yeah. He was saying that. He was saying, hey, the way we're headed, energy prices are going to go to zero because, nuclear and those types of sort of breakthroughs on the energy side are going to make energy basically effectively free. And then intelligence is going to zero. The price of intelligence is going to zero. Maybe intelligence itself is going to zero too. And what does that do? And does that mean we're all toast? Does that mean the machines take over? Or does that mean that, again, we're living in some utopia where a lot of the drudgery of life has sort of been taken out of it, and we've automated away, all sorts of things that we otherwise, we'd have to deal with. So there is a scenario here where, especially, the second point I would give you is Bob Muglia wrote a book that I have somewhere around here. In fact, I could get it. But it's central to the book, or towards the end of the book, he talks about sort of like, how do we make sure that this AI is being sort of developed in a way to serve humanity's needs, not to overtake humanity. Okay. And he was inspired by the Asimov laws, like the iRobot, I think, laws. It's like, we have to sort of make sure we create this technology in a way that serves us and makes our lives better. It makes us easier for us to spend time on the kinds of things we really enjoy spending time on, and less on the drudgery. And that, so far, has been the trend with technology, right? You can complain a lot about life today, but, our life expectancies have never been better. The kind of access to healthcare today, like the average life is today is much better than the life of royalty even 100 or 200 years ago, right? So I think there is a path here, as long as people like you keep asking the question you're asking, and making sure that we don't lose the plot, that we're not building AI in a foolish way, that we're building it to really make our lives better, et cetera. I think there's a path to a utopian outcome with much better quality of lives for most of us, as has been the trend so far.
By the way, and I agree with that. I actually I think it might come along at just the right. There's much broader social trends happening with regard to birth rates being down and the implications of population decline, and it may come along at absolutely the right time to pick up the slack for a lack.
Yeah,
I mean, now we're not talking 10 years, we're talking 100 years, but pick up the slack for a lack of people, ironically. So I'm with you on that, actually. I believe in the utopian story, if we can get that far.
Potential, at least.
If we can get that far.
Yeah, there's a potential.
So let's shift gears one more time, because I got a couple of young kids who just started work, came out of college, and are now in work. I've got another one who's just entering college, but they're going to have to deal with this for the rest of their career.
I have a 15-year-old. I know what you mean. Yeah.
Right. So let's provide them some advice, because I think it's something that we need to be thinking about, and I think from our perspectives we have some value to add there. I'm curious what you would suggest people think about. I mean, you must have interns, you must have other young folks in your organization who are kind of on the rise. I mean, what are you looking for, and what do you think, a person entering the workforce, and potentially, more specifically, entering in an IT role or an information worker role, what should they be preparing for?
Yeah, I mean, I think more and more, I just having this conversation with a friend of mine who is in accounting, and his son is studying computer science. And he was telling me, look, as a dad, I can't really help my son because I don't know, what should I advise him? What programming languages should he learn, et cetera, et cetera. And I know that was a relevant question maybe 20 years ago or 15 years ago, but it's a lot less about that these days. Like the specific syntax of a programming language, et cetera, is not really, I think, how I would advise someone, go learn this language or that language or this system or that. And there's of course room for that, but I think the advice I give is develop the discipline as a scientist or as an engineer. Develop the discipline to think about problem solving and to take something complex and to simplify it, to abstract over it, and learn how to learn. Because one thing that we're seeing here today is it's impossible to keep up with all the changes. And so the better you are at being able to absorb new ideas, new techniques, new technologies, et cetera, the more useful that you're going to be. And so it's more about thinking mindset and a learning mindset, and then having the toughness or the grit to just accept that you're constantly going to be, evolving, and there's no coasting here. I think it's probably these are the foundational aspects. Now, I have to tell you, as much as we sort of sometimes make fun of these kids as being sheltered and all of that, like the interns we get now, the quality of the 20, 22-year-olds that I'm seeing is amazing. Like, there's no way I could have competed as a 20-year-old with the product that that we're seeing now in terms of coming into the market and in terms of engineering talent and so on. These kids are so good. At least some of them are, So I do think that they're adapting, and I do think there's a talent density that it's just very, very impressive. I can't imagine being competing with those guys, given the 20-year-old I was back then.
I agree. I was a mess in my 20s, in my early 20s. And ill prepared. And quite frankly, I wasn't even thinking of getting into technology. It was a long, circuitous route for me. I've heard in some of my other interviews with CEOs the term grit. We actually had the CEO of Infor who wrote a book about grit. Grit is Not Enough, actually, is the name of the book. And I want to talk to you about your path, because you obviously respect grit, and you've taken a path that has led you to be CEO of a well-funded enterprise technology company in a very competitive and one would argue Darwinist environment. Where grit matters. But talk about how you got into it. Do you remember your first tech job and how you ended up in technology at all?
Yeah, it goes back to my teens, actually. And this is something that I'll come back to it, but I'm a little bit concerned about sort of the youth of today. They're so overscheduled and overprogrammed. And every hour is you're doing this sport or that music or that math class or whatever. When I was a teenager, I had lots of time on my hands, and there weren't that many TV stations at the time. And so, I had the time to get bored and time to develop interests. And some of my interests were in things like board games, but some of my interests were in computing. And you can spend a lot of time, enjoy yourself thinking about, how to program a game, for example. And I found that I was more interested in programming the game than playing the game in most cases. And so I just sort of knew from an early on that this was something that I enjoyed. And I kind of solved the grit problem by not putting myself in a position where I'm just having to work really hard at something I don't enjoy, right? If you kind of find something you're passionate about or something that you enjoy, it becomes really easy to spend a lot of time on it. And as the more time you spend, the more mastery you have. The more mastery you have, the more satisfying it is, the more confidence it builds, and the more rewarding it is, and more addictive it becomes in a sense. And so I just feel very fortunate that I stumbled into this thing that I really enjoyed that ended up being, career worthy.
Well, so talk about your roles. So, whenever I have this conversation, people, it feels very kind of organic how they ended up on their path, but you're making decisions, very conscious decisions along the way that I should take this job, or I should I need to get this experience, or I should try to learn this skill. I mean, so you have a proficiency for coding. What are some of the other roles that you did along the way? Because most coders don't end up CEO.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So first of all, I had other jobs. Like I moved furniture for a summer. I survived. I survived working drive-through cashier. I only survived 3 days. I had that job for 3 days. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. So not enough grit to survive. But it just sort of, I never had like a plan. Like I don't even like the term entrepreneur. Sometimes it's used in sort of the context of startup. It's never my thing. My thing was to do the most interesting work possible. And when I started out in technology, like the first job was this computer vision job that I told you about. I wanted to just to do the engineering. I wanted to do the technology. What I found though, if I didn't get involved in management, okay, if I didn't get involved in explaining the value of what we were doing, we were going to get crappy work. We were going to get work that we wouldn't enjoy, and it wouldn't be impactful. And it wouldn't be interesting, right? And so I just gravitated. My contribution to the team is I could explain what we were doing to people who had sort of control of the purse strings.
Yeah, sales engineer type, right? Get into the mix of those first calls.
Yeah, but even internally, even in our own company, just explaining to sort of the powers that be. And so that ended up being sort of a passion in its own right, is, seeing sort of the contribution being finding value, okay? Not like like finding real value to create sustainable investment in solving important problems. And so in the context of a big company, it was very difficult to do that. But then I after working at AT&T, I went to HNC. Like I said, that was a small company. And again, I was an engineer and I understood what we were doing, but they can sort of put me in front of a customer. So I helped sell. I wore the sales engineering hat, even though I was VP of engineering. I ran product development. And then after we sold it, then I sort of wore the field engineering hat because I had to implement the thing, right? And after we implemented it, I had to take the support call. So I learned about that. And then you see that life cycle, and then you start building software to make it easier to sell, easier to implement, easier to support, because you know the downstream pain of it. Okay. And so it was, curiosity that sort of took me there, and just like the stubbornness, not wanting to do, things that were not interesting. And so, I found I had a talent for arguing for, things that were interesting and impactful and could move the needle and can make hundreds of millions of dollars for companies because they were based on things like AI, which is very interesting. Okay. And so that combination worked out really well for me. Not everybody makes my choice. I work with a lot of people who are much smarter than me, but they focused on just the technology, and they rely on me to kind of bridge to the enterprise and to funding and things like that.
So I'm curious to get your take on post-pandemic work environment. And I don't want to, tip over anything with regard to what you've decided internally, but it's my perspective anyway that this is the worst possible time to be working from home. That because there's so many implications to the technologies that are going to be implemented in organizations, that this work-life balance value proposition that people are kind of hanging on to keep them out of the office is going to cause them to be they're missing out on the organic conversations that can potentially enhance their career. I mean, you have to have examples where you wouldn't have made decisions if you didn't have that organic conversation walking down the hall or at lunch or, at the water cooler, right? I mean, What do you think about that?
Okay, so I'll tie a couple of threads here together. So we have been distributed from the beginning pre-COVID, okay? And the reason that we were distributed from the beginning pre-COVID is talent and availability of talent. Like the idea of building a company like ours and finding all the talent in one city, even if it's Silicon Valley or San Francisco, is just daunting. Like it's very, very hard to assemble the kind of talent we've assembled. So going back to my previous company, LogicBlox, we would basically hire the talent wherever we could find it. And because, we were working on such interesting problems and such hard problems, we could sort of draw people to the company based on the quality of the problem and the quality of the team already working on it. But we understood very much the point that you're making, that serendipity is important and water cooler conversations are important. You can approximate that a little bit with things like today, like Slack and Google Docs and so on. But from day one, we implemented a culture where we took whatever money we were spending on an office, okay, we were going to spend on having an office, and we spent it on having these, we call them cons. So, every quarter, 4 months, whatever, we fly a team into the same place. In the old days, we would just Airbnb somewhere, get a house or a couple of houses, and you'd spend, a week together in a way that actually created much better or much stronger bonds in some ways than if we're, I'm on the 4th floor, you're on the 3rd floor, and we see each other on the elevator, because you're having breakfast together, you're having lunch together, you're having dinner together, you're cooking together half the time. And you're doing things that you wouldn't normally do if you were just, I come to the office and I see you on the way in and I see you on the way out. So we've augmented the sort of distributed thing that lets people, live where they need to live or want to live because they have a partner or they have family constraints or they just, you like the beach, I like the mountains, whatever. But we have a forcing function on like spending time together. And it's very important not to forget that part of it. And every time we get together, we're productive in a very different way than when we're remote. When we're remote, we're productive because we're not sitting in a car for an hour a day. And, there are sort of other ways to be productive when you're remote because you can sort of accommodate your personal constraints more easily if you're working from home sometimes. But you need to spend time together. That's not optional.
So how do you engender your culture? It sounds like that's a pretty good example of how you're trying to foster a culture. But how have you thought about culture? Like what is culture, or what type of culture are you trying to create at RelationalAI?
Yeah, really interesting question. We think about it a lot. I remember, the first time we brought the founding team or the initial team at RelationalAI, in that first conversation, we were like, hey, the first dozen or so people of this company are going to set the culture for this company, okay? It'll become much, much harder to change. So what kind of culture do we want? And we in the initial sort of culture was very much about transparency and openness. And sort of every quarter we have a company survey that goes out and we ask people, hey, what should we stop doing, keep doing, start doing, et cetera. And one of the most consistent bits of feedback we get is like, keep being transparent, because we share with everybody stuff that they're not used to seeing, how much money we have, how much runway we have, customer issues, customer challenges, there's all sorts of stuff that usually you don't get access to at sort of every level of the company. And we try very much to be very, very transparent. And we use that to build a foundation of trust that it creates safety and, makes it easier for people to work together as teams because they have all the context, they have all the data. It also improves decision-making because, if I'm making a decision about how much money to spend, it's very helpful to know what the company's financial situation is. So transparency is fundamental to our culture. Over time, people sort of also say they appreciate sort of our respect for innovation. And over time, as we started to be in market, customer centricity and execution have become very important sort of cultural objectives. And we now measure ourselves, along those dimensions. Are we transparent? Are we customer-centric enough? Are we executing? Do we do what we say we're going to do? And then, do we balance execution with innovation? Because innovation is the source of value creation, right? And at our size, we don't have the resources of a Google or an Amazon or Microsoft. So you have to sort of outsmart the problem more than just, outmuscle the problem, if you know what I mean. So.
Yeah, no, it's one of the trickiest I've found. It's one of the trickiest. I consider this singular characteristic of conscientiousness as the magic dust, almost. It has a little bit of grit. It has a little bit of innovation. I mean, there's this going above and beyond element to a person that when you find it. It is like water and nutrients to the culture when you get people who just naturally go the extra mile.
Yeah, they behave like owners, right? They care. They fundamentally care. They're conscientious.
They do, and they care, and they care in a way that is almost over and above the corporation. They care about just the personal integrity. Yep. Which is extraordinarily hard to find. I would love to know if you have any interview questions at some point that can pull that out, because it's one of it's when you realize you have it, and you almost never realize you have it until after you've seen them perform. It's one of the most heartwarming discoveries in an employee and a coworker to see that.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it's not something you can ask in an interview. Hey, are you conscientious, or are you?
Will you go above and beyond?
But you can ask around it. You can sort of think of examples of questions that could sort of give someone an opportunity to give you concrete examples where they might have been. So you do your best in the hiring process, and at our size, a lot of the hiring are people through in the network somehow, and so. You kind of have a sense of them before, not always. But you also just need to recognize that you're going to mishire, and you just need to have a kind of culture that values culture enough where if someone's not compatible that way, you find a nice way of.
Well, I have really enjoyed this conversation. This was great. We covered a lot of ground. I appreciate your time and your transparency. It was very enlightening for me. Best of luck with relational AI. It sounds like an amazing opportunity, and I couldn't agree with you more. There's the data cloud is going to happen, and it will be pervasive, and as we cycle out some of the older folks who are in the way and the younger folks come along,
you and I,
we might be in that demographic. But yeah, so yeah, Molham, best of luck going forward, and we look forward to talking to you down the road.
Same, Doug. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it. And if anyone in your audience is curious about what we talked about, wants to reach out, please do. Okay, I can be reached at my first name last name at RelationalAI. Okay, so
great. We'll put it in the description.
Okay, yeah. Just don't make it so that screen scrapers can get it. Okay?
Actually, we won't put it in the description. You can't trust these bots. All right, great. Well, thanks very much. And like I said, we'll talk soon.
Cheers.
Solutions Review is inviting you to join InsightJam.com. What started a few years ago as a social media event to celebrate enterprise technology has now grown into an always-on tech community with live events, discussions, videos, vendor showcases, and industry resources. Our vetted roster of experts, thought leaders, and analysts are sharing tips and tricks daily. So if you're interested in getting involved, join the long list of companies and brands who have already participated by visiting InsightJam.com today. Now back to the show.